I think there's obviously been investment platforms around for quite some time, and I think for a long time the innovation on the investment side has been about giving people access to different markets, to different asset classes, to being able to invest in more and more things. In general, we want to engage with things that we find are beautiful or are easy to use or attractive to engage with, and I think that's why that design matters hugely. And financial services are just like, here's some information, go and make a decision. And I'm like, you have to do so much more for someone to actually want to spend the time in that product. So in 2020 is when we started kind of we got the first investment round raised, and we started building a team. And that was also when me and my co-founder met, and we actually worked together because of the pandemic and so on. We worked together for a whole year before we actually met in person the first time.
Welcome to another episode of FinTech Diaries. Today we are here with the lovely Felicia Hjertman, CEO and founder of TILLIT, which is a very exciting investment platform. Why don't you do a little bit of an intro to yourself and to TILLIT for us?
Thank you. Well, it's great to be here and look forward to talking about what we do and so on. But essentially, yes, so I'm the founder and the CEO of TILLIT. And I'm sure we'll come on to that. But before starting TILLIT, I was in financial services. So my background has always been finance and investing specifically, and which is what TILLIT is all about. So we are an investment platform where fundamentally what we're trying to do is empower people with the tools, the knowledge, and the confidence, most importantly, to be able to take control of their money and make great decisions with their money. And that is focused on savings at different stages. So shorter term, and by short term we mean like ISAs and so on, all the way up to your pension and retirement, essentially. That is in a nutshell what we're about, and then we go about doing that in a very particular way, which I'm sure we'll come on to.
Yeah, I'd love to pick up on that actually. How is it that different, I guess, to your standard, Hargreaves Lansdown or whatever platforms are out there at the moment? There's quite a lot of them, but I think you guys are doing something in a very interesting way.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's obviously been investment platforms around for quite some time, and I think for a long time, the innovation on the investment side has been about giving people access to different markets, to different asset classes, to being able to invest in more and more things, which is great. Access is, without access, we can't do anything. However, what we are about and what we believe is going to be like the next generation of platforms and essentially services and products that really are going to add value to customers is helping people make good decisions, not just investing in anything, but actually understanding why should I invest in this or not in that or so on. And so that's what we are about. We're about kind of quality of decision making, and that we've done that because of my background as a professional investor, where making investment decisions, if you actually want to try and do that well for the long term, you need to invest based on fundamentals. You need to know why you invested in something, because otherwise you're more likely to panic when things go badly. But essentially the way that we try to do that is a few things. So first of all, TILLIT is a curated platform. So we don't offer all of market. Instead, we handpick everything that you can invest on TILLIT. It has been handpicked by our team and our investment committee. And we do that because we've all seen these studies around too much choice leads to not just poor decision making, but sometimes people just get paralyzed by choice. And when it comes to investing, there are thousands of different things that you could theoretically invest in. And we know that people don't have the capacity, the time, the willingness to go through all of those and make a good decision. And so that's why we curate what we think are the best in class investment opportunities. And that is across different asset classes, across different parts of the world, across different styles and so on as well. So that's one thing. So it's a bit like, you made a reference to Hargreaves there. It's a bit like these platforms otherwise tend to have a best buy list. And I tend to describe TILLIT like it's a best buy list on steroids. That's what we do. So we handpick everything and then we go deeper on those funds, which brings me on to the second thing, is that we only focus on funds. And by funds, we mean open-ended funds, investment trusts and ETFs. So it's across passive and active. But you can't come to TILLIT and invest in, say, Tesla or Amazon specifically in terms of stocks. But the reason we do that is because, again, my background around being a professional stock picker is incredibly hard to do well, even when it is your job and you have the most amazing resources in the world. And actually, one thing that people don't think about with funds is that you can have access to much bigger parts and more interesting parts of the markets through funds, because as an individual investor, you don't usually have access to, say, small companies in China or in Africa, or very niche illiquid assets. Whereas with funds, because you're buying a collection of assets, you can actually go there and have that exposure in your portfolio. And then the last bit I would say is about the quality of the information that we give you and the environment in general. So when you come onto TILLIT, it looks very different from any other investment platform. We draw on a lot of design inspiration from consumer industries and branding and other industries where the design and the quality makes a difference in how people feel, how they use a product. And then the language that we use is very different. We try to make it's not about dumbing things down, but it's about using plain language like we do when we have a conversation, rather than when we read a fact sheet with lots of jargon. So trying to give you that accessible environment to make good decisions in a trusted environment and feel confident about those decisions.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And hopefully that encourages more people to get involved in investing, because you see, and I think I kind of saw it on some of your LinkedIn's and on your website, people put off investing. They think it's too complex, or I don't have enough money to do it, or I need a financial advisor or something like that. But if we can it's too risky, I don't understand all the detail. We can get more people investing. People, everyone can start building that wealth, which is really important, because we see such a divide in gender, such a divide across the board when it comes to investing. So will really help to close that.
I completely agree. And all of the things that you just said, I could go on a rant, and they are bugbears of mine, all of the reasons why people don't invest. And I completely understand why. And I think the industry is really putting people outside, making them feel that way, when really none of that is true. And that is a big thing that we all in the industry need to take responsibility for changing, and making sure that we make that an environment that people want to be in and feel that is accessible and they belong there, rather than making it feel like something that is not for them, because that's not true.
Definitely. And on that, I'd love to hear more about the TILLIT pension offering, because that's another area where people just completely put off, don't think about, that I think what you're looking to do there will really change the market.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're hoping to do. I think when we started TILLIT, we went to the market with a stocks and shares ISA and a general investment account, which is still kind of core to the business, of course. And it is ultimately a do-it-yourself platform. So we don't give personal financial advice. And the reason for that is because my personal view on this, unless you have a particularly complex tax situation or need estate planning or whatever it might mean, or whatever it is that you need, the benefit of personal financial advice isn't there. When it comes to investments only, actually, most people can make great decisions themselves as long as you have access to those tools and that information. And that's what we're trying to do. So when we started with ISAs and GAAs, generally the kind of customer that we've had is someone who has been investing before. So they're not completely new to it, because they're still making their own decisions. Whereas now that we've launched a pension proposition, that pool of customers widens, because the pension that we have, whilst you can come directly and open your pension account with us, it's a self-invested personal pension. So it's a SIP. You can have that as a personal account to you. But what our main strategy and what we're doing is we're partnering with employers to offer that premium pension experience that gives their employees freedom and flexibility to take control of their money. And I think, as you pointed to there, the awareness and engagement with pensions here, and even people have such anxiety around their pension here as well, because of the lack of understanding, because of how these things work and so on. It's so important that we create products that people want to engage with and can engage with. And that's exactly what we've done with the pension. We've started from that point of, what is it that an individual need to be able to understand where my money is, understand how I make good decisions, and then kind of go from there. Whereas I think a lot of other pension providers have come from the background of, we were selling to employers. It used to be the employer's responsibility and decision. We didn't have to worry about having enough money for our retirement, because we got money, essentially. We got given a pension. Whereas nowadays, our generations and the generations coming after us, it's our responsibility to ensure we have enough to retire on. but that control over who's made the decision of where is your pension still sits with the employer.
Yeah.
And that's where we think what we want to change is giving more of that control back in the hands of the individual if they want it.
Yeah.
And that is control over the provider, is control over the investment decisions, is control over the fees, is control over all of that. And that's what we're trying to change.
Yeah, it feels like throughout all of this, you've really had the end customer in mind and thinking exactly what is best for them, and then how can we offer something that's best for them. How have you got that view? Do you have like forums with customers, have a lot of kind of beta testing or feedback? How do you incorporate that into what you do?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one of those things. I think it's a cultural thing in a company, and some companies have built amazing products because they really listen to their customers, and that's exactly what we're trying to do and have been everything from the start. And I think a lot of what we do now is built on what we learned in having a product with the ICE and the GA that is directed to consumer. We've kind of gone from the D2C space into the B2B2C space, essentially, because we essentially partnering with the employer. They have to make the first decision to bring us in, to offer us to their teams, but then ultimately it's an individual making the decision. But because we come from the perspective of the product and the service has to be compelling enough for an individual to choose us actively. Yeah. I think that starting point, we've learned a lot in that experience of what did we need in terms of content, what do we need in terms of customer support, what do we need in terms of all of this. And then we've tried to kind of double down on that from a pension perspective. We've also done a lot of market research around how our attitude's changing to pensions. What do people actually want with their pension? Do they want more control? Yeah. And the industries assume they don't. And actually the data is really excitingly showing that if you look at employees up to 45, they do want more control. And I think that comes from the fact that we're much more used to being able to invest and make our decisions in an app on the go. And people are starting to wake up to, well, why can't I do that in my pension? So there is change there. And I think we're trying to draw on our lessons in the D2C space, together with market research, together with now that the pension went live in July, we now have the first employees onboarded, and we get a lot of feedback through that, which is almost strange that in the B2B space, we almost feel closer to the customer because we work very closely with those employers to provide not just the pension account, but the financial education and the support that their employees want and need that usually the company can't offer because they're not well placed or have the capacity to do that.
Yeah, I think it sounds like, it's all about that empowerment and giving customers the information, the access, and simplifying the language. Like you said, I think you have quite a unique way of addressing that kind of financial education gap almost when it comes to specifically to pensions or just investing in general, which is really great. How does the app actually sort of differ in terms of the customer experience then when you're looking at it from a pensions for your workplace pensions, or if you're just investing into funds, for example? Does that differ, or is it kind of similar from a customer's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're looking at kind of traditional pension, if I just look at the pension space in general, I think there's the traditional incumbents in the pension space and how they built their products, and then there's the challengers kind of coming in, and I have a huge amount of respect for people like Penfold and like Monzo going to pensions, and of course what pension being done, and there's loads of different kind of perspectives there. My view would be that a lot of the innovation in pensions so far has been on that kind of technical, here's a slick tech interface on how you get access to your pension with the app and so on. And I think that easy onboarding, making sure everything's electronic, all of those things.
Flows,
yeah. And so for us, there's obviously also a core part is just hygiene of building a pension or any investment product, I would say. So that's one thing where I think the challengers are doing better because we have a fresher tech stack than what the incumbents are able to do, because they're dealing with a lot more challenges to change an existing product. I think that's one thing, but that is not how we really differentiate. An easy onboarding is one thing, but it's really that it comes back into what TILLIT is all about, is that experience of how do I think about, okay, this is my pension. How do I think about either, do I want to make my own decisions or do I not? Why would I want to, or do something in between? So for instance, with TILLIT, usually with pensions, you either get no choice and you're in one default fund, usually what that's called, and that is decided by someone else how that's invested, how your money is invested. Or you have situations where you can actually choose something else, but then it's an either or decision.
Yeah.
It's not like you can leave some of it in the default fund and then do like a 10%, 20%, 50% of what you care about, whether that is really sustainable investments or more in tech or whatever it might be. And so we've tried to take that flexible approach where you can leave it either all in what we have, an excellent default fund, or indeed you can take a proportion out of that and make your own decisions. And in that process, we then support you with how do you think about. So you can go completely into our universe and just make your own decision straight away. But we are developing more and more support around, do you think about growing your money versus protecting your money? What about the circumstance of how far you are from retirement? What does that mean for the asset classes that you should look at? But again, we try to talk about it not about equities and bonds, but we bring it in from the perspective, what's the purpose of equities? What's the purpose of bonds? And why should you care? And why is that important? And so it's that whole process where there's a lot more. I wouldn't say it's hand holding, because it's not, again, I don't think it's about dumbing things down. It's not that financial services or pensions need to be difficult. It's about speaking to someone as a human and what is it that matters to you and what is it that's important to you right now. And so it's much more support along that journey to, again, like you said, empowering people to feel, okay, actually I can take control of this, and I can also choose to do that at different stages in my life, essentially. So, and then there's a lot more that comes into the detail of features and so on. But that's a principal concept of it.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And I feel from the making the language accessible, but also like I've had a look at it as well. It looks so sleek and nice to use as well. It's like making people actually want to engage with finance, because at the moment you do just put it off because you're like, there's nothing exciting about it. Like there's so much jargon and nothing's looking good. Whereas you're making it something you actually want to engage in, which is only going to benefit the consumer in the long run if they do.
I think so too. And I think it's even like taking a step back from finance. I think in general, we want to engage with things that we find are beautiful or are easy to use or like, attractive to engage with. And I think that's why that design matters hugely. And financial services are just like, here's some information, go and make a decision. And I'm like, you have to do so much more for someone to actually want to spend the time in that product. And so design is one thing, but I think also with other pension providers, which is where we're different, is how even we present those investment options. So it's not just about how should you think about growing or protecting your money, but then how do you understand what this fund does versus that fund? So one example of that is that we have moved the fund names down much deeper into the funnel. So what we lead with is actually, we've given every single fund on the platform a one-liner, like one sentence of what it does on the tin. So things like investing in change makers in private and public markets tells someone so much more than Scottish mortgage, for example, which means
equity
nothing.
index.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like the fund names mean nothing to normal human beings, barely industry professionals. And so we're like, well, that's not going to help something. And it means that someone's drawn to, oh, I've heard of Vanguard or I've heard of BlackRock and therefore it must be good. And it's so not that way. And that's why, because our funds are from over 60 different investment like asset managers, and some of those are boutiques that specialize and do a brilliant job at investing in a very particular way. So we want to try and help people understand what is it that you're looking for and why, rather than I'm drawn to that name because I've heard of that name before. And that idea in itself comes from actually the whiskey industry and what a certain company does in Scotland where I used to live. So I think again it's drawing inspiration on how do you make something accessible in a way that people want to engage with it, rather than thinking finance needs to be presented in this way.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think also another like key aspect, you touched on it a little bit earlier, about handpicking the funds as well. How does that actually look like in practice? Because there must be a lot of work that goes on to that. Is that something you're going to obviously continue for, the rest of TILLIT's future, or is that something that's kind of, it's something right now, or,
It is central to what we do and why you would come to us. So we haven't talked about it yet, USP, but TILLIT means trust in Swedish. I'm Swedish, hence the connection. But the reason for that name is not just random. I think trust is the holy grail of financial services and a lot of relationships to products and people in general. And without trust, then you have nothing. And again, it's about trusting us. It's about trusting the decisions that you make. It's about trusting the information and all of those things. And so the handpicking of the funds and the way that we go about that is a core part of what we do and will remain a core part of what we do. And the reason for that is, my background around where I manage money professionally for institutional investors, they usually have the help of a consultant who roams the world to find the best managers to speak to. And that's what we as individuals don't have. So I think we want to be that guide for you. We're not telling you should invest in X, but we're saying, depending on what it is that you're looking for, here's a great selection. And so, as you said, there's a lot of work. Our head of fund selection, Sheridan, is a very busy man. And essentially we've developed our own unique process and due diligence questionnaires and all of the ongoing work that we do. There's a huge amount that goes into that, that then goes to our investment committee, where recommendations are essentially put forward to the investment committee, and then the investment committee together as an individual group of 6 individuals who then do a lot of ripping the investment cases apart and then usually do more work, and then we onboard very few at any given time, because we want that not to be an overwhelming selection, and every single fund needs to earn its keep, both to get in but also to stay on the platform. And so that process is really important, and it is an area that we will continue to kind of, I think, add value, because again, it comes back to when you have 5,000 funds, more actually, how do you make a decision of why should I pick one or the other? So that is why you come to TILLIT, because you want to have that choice, but also the support of, okay, this has been DD'd essentially.
I think it's back to your point on feeling paralyzed with choice. I think I get that quite a lot as well. Even when I went through my own kind of investing journey, I was just absolutely boggled by how much there was, and I didn't really know which app to download, which fund to invest in, whether I should invest in a fund. There was just so many questions that I think you really have to go out there and properly research it yourself. But I think you providing that element of education alongside and support to empower the customer, I think it's really great.
I think just one thing, just briefly to add to that, I think there's without going into the geeky details of the debate around passive and active investing, but my background is obviously as an active fund manager, and I believe that active management has a role to play, and that passive also in terms of index trackers also has a role to play in someone's portfolio. There are pros and cons with those different choices, but I think there is an even more live debate of, if you're going to pay a bit more to invest in an actively managed fund, that due diligence around why do we pick this one, and how do you identify a good active fund? Because if you do identify a great active fund, the potential for outperformance is significant. Like my boss, who used to run Japanese equities for decades, outperformed their index by multiple whole percentage points per annum. And so you kind of extrapolate that out for the benefit and that is after fees, where fee is an important component of investing, but ultimately it's about returns, and returns are after fees. So that's why active, if you can pick great active funds, they do play a role, and there is huge potential there, which is why, again, that fund selection piece is so important.
And so it sounds like having amazing people working at TILLIT has been vital in the success. How have you seen the company grow? Because it's been going for 5 years now.
So we started in the pandemic. That was exciting. So in 2020 is when we started kind of we got the first investment round raised. And we started building a team, and that was also when me and my co-founder met, and we actually worked together because of the pandemic and so on. We worked together for a whole year before we actually met in person the first time.
Really?
So it says a lot about if you want to build something great and a team and so on without being in the same room, you can.
Were you still working at your previous company, or did you kind of quit knowing you had this idea and started to build it? So
I completely left my previous employer, and then I actually went and learned some software development actually. So I did a coding course and so on. And so I left my old employer in 2019, and then started trying to find that initial capital, my co-founder building a team in 2020. And so, but then we went live to the public in 2021. And so in that sense, we have grown, and we now 9 people in the team, plus the investment committee and advisors and a board and so on. But that's been an evolution. And as you said, people is, I genuinely, I've always thought of all companies, it is what the people are and what they contribute. Without great people, you don't have a great company. And I am incredibly privileged to have such brilliant people and dedicated and just all-round amazing humans work and dedicate their careers to also work for us and help us deliver on this mission. We do that together.
Yeah, I mean, if you just went by how many startups fail, I think no one would ever would ever do it.
Yeah.
We're clearly not
so
sane
it's
people.
very
We don't make rational decisions. Yeah.
No, I think it's great, and you know, look where it's kind of got you now, which is amazing. What's your sort of take on the necessary skills that you need to have as a founder? Because I think also, you know, being a fintech, you can be bootstrapping for a while. You know, even trying to raise funds, I think, is a whole process of its own. Trying to run a business at the same time, all of which require a lot of strength, mental strength, and capacity. So how I guess have you learned to harness some of those skills throughout, I don't know, maybe your background, or is it just kind of learning on the job and just taking each kind of day as it comes almost?
Yeah, I think, I mean, from my perspective, I would say before even getting into skills, I'd say the main thing is, what is the motivation? Like, why are you doing it? Because if it's money, you'll never last, because there are so many easier ways to make money than trying to build a company. And indeed, whether that is like, of course, I very obviously left a very well-paying career to do this, but I think in general, if your aim and mission is to get rich, go and do something else. Genuinely, this is not the right path. So I think if actually what drives you is a genuine kind of passion for doing what you do, and you want to drive change, you want to help people, you want to create something that genuinely makes either the world a better place or people, like, there needs to be something bigger that gets you up every morning, because it is, and any of my founder friends would agree, I think, but for me, it is the hardest thing I have ever done in my entire life. And then you multiply that by 10. Yeah. And I think you don't, and I knew it was going to be hard. I imagined it was going to be hard. Yeah. But I think you have to have that. If you don't have that overall purpose and mission that drives you, the skills kind of don't even come into the picture. So I think that's the first thing. Without that, you're dead. And as in, conceptually, in the premise of it won't last. I think the second thing after that is resilience comes from that. I think that mission drives you, but then it's the resilience of, okay, you kind of need to keep going, because it's not going to be, very few people have a path that goes like this in startups, right? And there were many times where the company's almost half dead and you kind of survive, and it's just, you need that resilience. I think the other thing is problem solving. The amount of problems that occur every single day, and things that you've never dealt with before, having to just figure things out, and the mental kind of the headspace of, okay, here's a problem, how do we solve it? I think that is also a way of, it's not really a skill, but some people just think like that, and I think you figure out, am I that kind of person or not when you're in it? And I think the other one is just I think personally people have different views here, but I think it is really important to think about, how do you attract great people? How do you lead as an example? How do you inspire others? How do you support others? Because coming back to what we talked about earlier, without great people, again, you have nothing. And so, and great people are going to be attracted to not just working with great leaders and founders, but also great colleagues. And so I think that whole piece and how much you care and dedicate to that is, and again, genuine kind of care for that is important, I would personally say. But then even with all of these things, the odds are still that you're going to fail. And I think that the resilience point of and extending that part, or maybe we'll come on to fundraising anyway later on, but that's...
Well, I was going to touch on that, because obviously you've had a really amazing, incredible career before you left to start TILLIT, but you leave, you've got this amazing idea which you're clearly really passionate about, and I can see that definitely will have come across when you were doing kind of the fundraising and the pitches. But, you know, you're a female, early 30s, got this amazing idea. How did you go about raising the funds and getting people bought on that mission enough to, I guess, invest in TILLIT?
Yeah, I think fundraising is it's a beast in itself, and most founders hate fundraising. I hate parts of it, but I don't hate all of it. And I think to an extent, all founders in the early days, and this is hearing this from investors, not just our own, but generally investors in the early days, it's all about the founders, in the sense of what is your passion? What is your ambition? Where is it going to go? All of that is about you. So I think, again, comes back to like what you need. If you're not genuinely passionate about this, you're not going to get anyone else passionate about it. And so I think that's the first thing of that is a really key part of it. But I think then I was privileged in a way that, of course, I came out of asset management, and our very first round, and this was again given on advice from professional investors who said, well, the hardest thing is kind of getting the train going. So you kind of want to get early commitments, and then you can approach from people who trust you, know you, because at this stage there's nothing else to go on. And then from there you kind of raise from external investors. So I was fortunate enough to have people to reach out to who had made a lot of money in financial services, and who were able to write an angel check to back us, to give us that initial kind of commitments that then really genuinely helped us go to external investors who didn't know us. And remember, we raised our first round before there was a product, before there was a team. There was just me and my co-founder just left his job. So like there was an idea, there was a prototype, but that was it. So in that sense, I think that part really genuinely helped. Of course, that's just one round. We've raised, we raised three funding rounds. We raised just around £6 million over the last few years. And so that requires continuous kind of fundraising ability. You can't just only go to one small group of people. And I think that's where the resilience point comes back in, where I always describe fundraising as a crash course in rejection. So if you don't like rejection, then fundraising you won't enjoy, because the whole game, and it is unfortunately to a great extent a game with a huge component of luck, in the sense of being in the right place, in front of the right people at the right time. But your job is to get, as a founder, is to get as many people as possible to say yes. Professional investors' job is to get any reason to say no, because they make few decisions, right? As in few investments every year. So you're ultimately opposite ends of the spectrum, and genuinely most people will say no. And we know from some of the most successful companies in the world, there are famous stories of investors who turn them down in the early days. And so every founder will have brilliant people, brilliant investors with great track records saying, you're crazy, this will never work, it's not good enough, whatever it is. That doesn't mean that they are right. And I think you have to keep believing in, your product and your company and your vision better than anyone else. And you have to keep banging down the doors to get to the right people who also see that vision with you, because they do exist. It's just, do you get to them before you run out of runway? Essentially, that is essentially it, I would say.
Yeah, because you have a co-founder as well that can obviously help with that, supporting each other, and potentially when things are getting tough. I think for sole founders as well, if they have any kind of mentors or people within the space that they can talk to, I think even just hearing about other founders going through a similar journey will always help. But I completely agree. And I think there are also communities for founders as well, which I would say are very worthwhile. And I've recently actually joined a new community. Tried to join something similar before, but couldn't get me in, long story short, because sometimes these communities create these kind of ongoing sessions where you have completely confidential conversations with other founders, and it's about kind of trying to learn from each other's experiences. And part of that, I kind of refer to it as founder therapy, because it feels like that. And it's weird. I went to an event recently, and at the end of it, it was about kind of B2B growth strategies and so on. And I think at the end of it, one of the comments was like, well, one of my takeaways is also, it's almost nice to hear that otherwise other people are also struggling. Like there is that element of sometimes you feel it can be quite lonely as a founder, and there's a lot of responsibility on your shoulders. I think hearing and sharing with others of, no, it is just really bloody hard. Is sometimes you need a reminder of that. It's not just that. It's not that you are failing. It is just really hard. If it wasn't hard, everyone would be doing it, and everyone would be succeeding. So
and we've touched on growing a company, being the leader of an organisation that is growing comes with a lot of challenges. But what have you found the most enjoyable or exciting aspect of it?
Oh, there's a lot. I mean, I think there's two things that I always kind of value more, not value, that's the wrong word, but that kind of warms my heart a bit more in that sense, and it really helps with that kind of keeping you motivated of like, no, we are making a difference, is I think how either when you meet great people who want to come and join the team, and they choose to work with you, they choose to put in most of our, our waking hours are at work, and they choose to spend that time with you, alongside you, building a great product that really helps customers, and get excited about that vision and how we're changing something and helping people. I think that is always such a privilege to be able to work with brilliant people who choose to do that. I think that's one thing. And the other thing, which is, I would say, equally as kind of, that really brings me a lot of joy, is when you hear from a customer that we have changed the way they feel about investing, or the way they make decisions. We have people who've been investing for decades, and when we do a lot of customer interviews, when we do these things and we hear about what their background is, and then we kind of play back to them, it's like, so you're quite experienced. Most of the time people go, oh, no, I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, literally no idea. And most people don't have any clue what they're doing, even people who've been doing it for a long time. And so when people either like that come to us and say, I've been investing in this fund for 20 years. This is the first time I actually know what it does. Like, that for me is like, okay, then we have helped someone make a better informed decision. Like, or indeed you have someone who's completely new to investing, and they come to us saying, I love TILLIT because I actually feel like I know what I'm doing and I understand these things. And I think, again, it's about that empowerment of making someone, whether they're completely new to it or having done it for a long time, feel that confidence, like, I know I can do this kind of thing. So for me, that is so important. And I think becoming even more and more important in pensions, getting young people excited about pensions. God, that is such a joy. Genuinely I get a kick out of seeing a young person say, oh my God, I actually get what a pension is, and I understand what I'm going to do, and I'm so excited, I'm going to tell all my friends. So
yeah, no, I think if there's anything I'm taking away from this conversation, is that I want to do more active investing, and you personally have been the sole reason for that. So it's been lovely to hear about yourself and TILLIT. Thank you so much for being on today. Where at the end of every episode we do a fire round set of questions. 3 questions. Just to understand, key takeaways and things like that, as well as anything else you want to leave our listeners thinking about. So the first question is, what do you want to be known for?
That's a big question. I think for me, or I'm going to say for us, because it's not really about me, it's what we are doing as a team at TILLIT. But I think if we can be known in the future for having helped people think differently and feel differently about their money, I think that's a huge success, and that would be a real privilege, because financial literacy, education, and confidence so low. If we can help people feel better about their money, I'd be so proud, really proud.
Yeah, I have no doubt that will be achieved. And second question is, if you could change one thing about the industry, what would it be?
This I have a whole long list of things I'd like to change with the industry. I think ultimately a lot of that comes down, and I'm going to kind of narrow in on pensions a bit, because I think it is also the most important one, and most of us have one. But I think in general, the premise of you have to give people the ability to have more control, more flexibility, take charge of that, and have access to those decisions, rather than gatekeeping them and keeping that away from people. If you give them if they have the responsibility, they have to have the ability to have the control as well. So for me, that is a big part. And unfortunately, I think the current government and the regulators going in the wrong direction of that. And so I think that is so important if we actually want to help people, is give them the chance to make better decisions.
Absolutely. And the last question is, if there was a book or podcast or anything, I guess, that's helped you in your journey to being a founder, would you recommend to our listeners?
So this is hard, because there's so many cool things that you read and you listen to, and it feels wrong to kind of highlight one thing. But so I'm gonna kind of go in a slightly different way, I think, where it's perhaps less directly obvious to being a founder, but it has lessons for that too. But one of the first books, when I started with Baillie Gifford, they give you a reading list even before you come in, and saying big on reading in general, and hugely important. In all kinds of aspects. But one of the books on that initial reading list is called Fooled by Randomness, which is written by Nassim Taleb. And it's essentially a book about behavioral finance. And there's been so many books on behavioral finance, but I would say, it's the first one I read, so I'm probably biased in that sense. But I think also the way that he writes about it, it's not an investing book per se, but it's about the psychology of how we make decisions. And I think that is so interesting, both from investing, as a founder, as customers, as humans in general. And I think he writes about it in a very clear, accessible, and interesting way, whereas there are other books that come later which have basically made the exact same points in about 3 times as many pages in much more dry language. I'm not going to name them. But I would say Fooled by Randomness. I mean, he's written other great books as well, but I would say it's a really interesting and accessible and short read, really. So I would highlight that or encourage anyone to read that.
I love anything behavioural related.
Definitely.
It's so interesting.
It's so fascinating, isn't it? Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much
thank you so
for being
much.
with us today. It's been amazing. We can't wait to see what's next for TILLIT.
Thank you so much.
And I think you've got 2 more TILLIT users, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm signing up.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.